Good evening. How is everyone tonight? Great. Enjoying the literary festival? I know I am, yeah. My name is Mina Marcana. It is an incredible honor to be introducing this conversation between Adam Gopnik and Richard Brodhead on Mr. Gopnik's most recent book, The Real Work on the Mystery of Mastery, sponsored by Walter and Jerry Federovich. Thank you very much. So last night I had the opportunity to sit next to Adam Gopnik during the festival's medieval feast, celebrating a book co-written by Bernard Cornwell and the dazzling Suzanne Pollock called Uhtred's Feast. Now, full disclosure, I am an Adam Gopnik mega fan. I've been reading his articles in the New Yorker since I started reading the magazine. And when I was in Paris in my early 20s, I read his book, Paris to the Moon. The book helped me penetrate the superficial outer sphere of American expatriate life in Paris, which mostly entailed me smoking a cigarette casually while saying the phrase, je m'en fous. And it allowed me a more profound engagement with Parisian life, an update on the American abroad tradition articulated by Gertrude Stein and Ernest Hemingway, Josephine Baker, and James Baldwin. So imagine my utter delight in discovering that Adam Gopnik, whose essays had a formative impact on me on those years abroad 15 years ago, will be at the Charleston Literary Festival. And when you meet writers like this, who you feel somehow, some way, you feel like they're writing into your soul, you know, they can sort of look into it, they sort of feel like there's some kind of strange synergy there that jumps off the page, whether the subject is as grave as the rate of American incarceration, the desolation of our country's prison system, or as observational and pithy as riding New York City's buses. And I mean like the M2s, M3s, M4s, not the Greyhounds. Imagine meeting that person who you feel some sort of connection with, but you've never met in real life. Imagine meeting that person and realizing, much like yourself, they're a fellow fan. And when I say fan, I say that with a PH, of the Philadelphia Eagles. Where's Walter Federovich? Much to his chagrin. And imagine that, like you, they are very much analyzing on a daily basis the same relatively esoteric sports podcast, The Ringer's Philly Special with Ben Solak and Sheil Kapadia, for threads of dramatic narrative, of analytical underpinnings, of football philosophic frameworks. It's crazy to me that that happened. But it's that obsessive curiosity that threads through Mr. Gopnik's most recent book, The Real Work on the Mystery of Mastery. What does it truly take to master a skill, no matter how seemingly mundane or daily? As Mr. Gopnik writes in the book, doing something well for a lifetime actually teaches us less about what the real work is than doing something badly can teach us when we start doing it anew. Everybody's good at something. Being bad at something reminds us of how we ever got good at anything. That, my friends, is what Mr. Gopnik is the master of, observing absolutely everything, including an obscure sports podcast, and rewarding us, the reader, with those lessons of everyday life. Now, on to the more formal aspects of this introduction. Adam Gopnik has been writing for The New Yorker since 1986. He is a 3-time winner of the National Magazine Award for Essays and for Criticism and of the George Polkerode Award for Magazine Reporting. In March 2013, he was awarded the Chevalier de l'Ordre des Arts by the French Republic. He lives in New York City with his wife and their 2 kids. His most recent book, The Real Work on the Mystery of Mastery, is published by Liveright, an imprint of Norton, and is available wherever you buy books, including at the back of this church. His interlocutor, Richard Brodhead, is a scholar of 19th century literature, served as the 9th president of Duke University from 2004 to 2017, and was the A. Bartlett, got some Duke fans there, some Blue Devils, and was the A. Bartlett Giamatti Professor of English at Yale University and Dean of Yale College. Brodhead, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, is the author or contributor to more than a dozen books on American writers, including Nathaniel Hawthorne, books on Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, William Faulkner, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Richard Wright, amongst others. Thank you very much, and let's welcome these two gentlemen on what's sure to be a wonderful evening.
Before you start, Richard, may I just say, that's one of the moments in your life when a distinguished cultural figure says, I've been reading you since I learned to read. And you still think of yourself as a young pup who's got a future ahead of him. The only thing that's harder is when a young woman at the university comes up and says, oh, are you? And you say, yeah, I am. And I say, oh, I can't wait to tell my mother.
There we have it. But many people here can go tell their children.
Yes.
So only to say that when I asked whether the red thread in your lapel was because was your Chevalier Award, you told me it was your Légion d'honneur.
Yes.
So I don't want any honor to be withheld.
No, last year I got the Légion d'honneur from the French Republic, and it's the closest I'll ever get to anything, and to a Super Bowl championship. So I wear it with pride.
There you go. What a beautiful space.
Amazing.
Right, let's start in. I thought I would just ask you a question. I bet I'm not the only person here who saw the movie Tar. And the movie Tar starts with an interview. It starts with Cate Blanchett playing a famous woman director, a typically male role. And they needed to find somebody who would represent high cultural intelligence, articulateness, grace. And so Adam Gopnik plays Adam Gopnik. And so I am today playing Adam Gopnik.
Yes.
As we have said. But a funny thing in that interview is that actually, as she gives her eloquent answers, at a certain point you realize someone in the back of the room is mouthing all those same answers. And you realize that these very spontaneous, seeming excellent answers are actually part of a script that has been totally mastered. This will not be possible for you because I didn't tell you the question.
Well, but you see the woman back there mouthing all my answers.
Oh, perfect. Oh, I did see a little string going up and down on you.
Exactly.
Well, let me ask you, so what was it like? You've been Adam Gopnik for many years.
Yes.
What was it like to play Adam Gopnik?
Well, to answer seriously, and it's funny, I just did a conversation with Todd Field, the writer and director of Tar, on just this subject. And what's curious about it, I mean, it was lovely how it happened. Todd, who I'd never met, called me up and said, I've written a movie for Cate Blanchett that has a part in it for someone named Adam Gopnik, and I wonder if you would consider playing him. And
or maybe Tom Cruise would.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so at first I said, no, that's not, it's so nice of you, but it's not what I do. And then he said, in effect, it's such a shame because we'd love to bring you and your wife to Berlin for 10 days and put you up. And Kate will be so disappointed because she's been so looking forward to working with you, and now we'll have to find some actor to portray you. So I said, in effect, hold on a second, let me call Mr. Gopnik to the phone.
Right.
And agreed to do it. And to come to your question, so this is what the part of it I thought was interesting. You know the great sociologist Irving Goffman,
We'll talk about him a little later.
Yes,
too.
right.
Yeah.
Goffman always said that in life, we're always portraying ourselves, right? We arrive at some version of ourselves that's acceptable to us or to other people, and then we just inhabit it. And so the part I was playing in Tar is one version of myself that I frequently play. I'm often sitting in that chair, and I'm doing a conversation with you, with Richard Brodhead, or with James Taylor, or Stephen Sondheim, or someone. And that person is a simulacra of myself. He's much more interested in other people than I actually am.
Exactly.
He's much more prepared to ask questions. He's a little stupider than I am because you're always in that thing of saying, so Steve Sondheim, so tell us, when did you meet Oscar Hammerstein? Well, everybody knows when he met Oscar Hammerstein, but it's the way you answer the question. In Tar, actually, there was a funny moment. I don't know how many people have seen it, so I won't stay on it too long, but she talks brilliantly, both as a character and
Right.
because Kate Blanchett is an astounding actor, about working with Leonard Bernstein.
Right.
And I was being really a little kind of actor with Todd Fields, and I went up to him and said, you know, Todd, I think there's a problem, because I don't think she could have worked with Leonard Bernstein.
Right.
She's too young.
Right.
And he gave me the director's look. And I said, okay, that's
Okay.
part of the movie.
Right.
So I have to, and as a consequence, in actual, I would have said, explain this to me, how you could have done it. But that's a character I play. So I had to portray myself portraying myself. And because we were in a theater in Berlin that was pretending to be Alice Tully Hall
Right.
with an audience exclusively of German speakers who had no idea what we were saying and had to be instructed when to laugh and when to applaud, I was in the position of portraying myself, portraying myself, portraying myself.
There we go. It'll be a little easier this time. Okay, so I'm going to play Richard Brodhead.
Okay.
Many people here speak English,
Yes.
so this will all be okay. We're at a writers' festival. The coach, Phil Knight, died this week, and in his obituary, I read that a sports writer quoted him as saying, "We all learned to write when we were in second grade, but most of us went on to do more important things later on." And I thought to myself, no wonder so many people disliked you. But when you come to a literary festival, you realize there's people who did go on to do more important things, namely even more writing, or even better writing, or even deeper writing. And to express themselves, to express us as we can't express ourselves. But the question I wanted to ask you is not how you became a writer, because I'm sure you became that in kindergarten or earlier, but rather, everybody at this festival is a writer. They spend their life making words and sharing words, but everyone we've seen so far writes in a completely different genre of writing. So I saw Bernard Cornwell, historical fiction, great long things. We had Claire Keegan today, short, lyrical, compressed, place-centered novels. She was interviewed by Fintan O'Toole, a journalism of a high order, history through memoir, all very different kinds of things. Richard Ford, interlocked novels of many sorts. But you don't write those genres. I mean, maybe if you do, I'm sorry that I'm not going to pretend to be familiar with your work in them. But only to say, when I think of you, you write many kinds of things. I know you wrote a libretto for an oratorio. You write musicals. But your real genre is the essay. And so you're the writer as essayist, as Richard Ford would be the writer as novelist. Why the essay? How did that become your natural medium?
When I was about 6 or 7 years old,
You wrote your first essay.
yes, I did. I read the Thurber Carnival, the great anthology of James Thurber, and I literally read it to pieces in bed till the binding was coming apart. And I said, this is what I want to do, because I was fascinated by two things. One was the power of crafting your own unhappiness into something that at least wore a funny hat and a smile. And the other, and even more significant thing, were the sentences. And I think one of the things that distinguish essayists from all the other kinds of writers, every kind of writer produces beautiful sentences.
Right.
And when I'm lucky to have my old friend Richard Ford here today, and no one can produce more memorable and heart-piercing sentences. But an essayist who is not primarily devoted to sentences will not survive and will not live. There are many remarkable novelists whose element of construction is the scene, is dramatic action.
That's right.
Great playwrights like Arthur Miller, who are very ham-handed
That's right.
in linguistic construction, but know how to land a character in a scene. That's the job of it. When I'm writing drama, in fact, I have to make a note for myself at the top of every page, don't aphorize, dramatize, right? Because my tendency is towards the aphoristic. But fortunately, that's a positive thing in an essayist. An essay is made up of sentences, and you work it in a certain sense, sentence by sentence. The other thing that for me that an essay does uniquely well is in the endless core business of writing, which is, for me, making private life public. It's making all the parts of ourselves inside that we are reluctant to say, that we have a difficult time articulating, that are taboo to articulate. Writers articulate them. And the essayist is uniquely devoted to that task, and has been since Montaigne invented the essay. That the business of the essayist is to articulate our inner life, and particularly to articulate the doubleness of our inner life. It's my favorite line, my favorite sentence from any essay is Montaigne's that we are, I know not how, somehow double in ourselves. So we believe the things that we deny and deny all that we believe. And that, for me, is not only the single most beautiful sentence, but is the core DNA of the essay. It's about ambivalence, about half-tints, about places where you are not certain. It is the opposite of the editorial or the polemic.
Right, because we could call those essays, but that's not what
Yes,
you
exactly,
mean by an essay.
exactly. And
Okay.
so for me, that's always been a place where I feel particularly, I hesitate to say I feel particularly happy to live. I would rather have written Oklahoma, but I didn't, and so I feel very much that that's the form that I live within and will live and die with.
I think two other things are true of essays. One, they're not infinitely long, right?
Yes, this is
When an essay is
true.
infinitely long, we call it something beside an essay. And so your works they're not sentences, but they're not volumes, right?
Yes.
So they're things you can start and finish, and
Yes.
then you can do another one.
Right.
So there's that. And the other thing is, I don't know, I was interested in your mentioning Montaigne. Montaigne gave us the word essay, which means SAA, to try.
try.
They're trying things rather than doing something you already know how to do.
Yes,
Or
exactly. They're explorations, inquiries.
Okay.
Right, exactly.
Attempts to understand,
yes.
attempts to use the work of writing to bring yourself to understand.
Exactly. And that's so, and now sliding seamlessly into self-promotion, that's very much what the essays in
Oh, but
my
we're
new
not getting
book-
there yet.
in my new book.
No, we're by no means
that's-
getting there yet, I'm sorry.
But the truth is that it is a distinct form in that way.
It is.
And it's different from criticism, for instance,
That's
right?
right.
There are many great critics who I read with relish. Edmund Wilson, let's say, or pick whomever. And the key difference, I think, there again, is partly it's a first-person difference. That is, we know the great essayists. We know Virginia Woolf is Virginia some way. When she's writing an essay,
Right.
we know her with a kind of intimacy that we don't know her in
her
the
novels.
waves or in
That's right.
the
right.
years. And so that's a crucially important part of it. And then I think as well that the essayist has the license, though it's the enormous risk of it, to focus on things that may seem trivial or secondary, on broomsticks and on E.B. White, one of my favorite essayists and the godfather of the New Yorker. That's probably an inappropriate metaphor, not the godfather so much, but the
In a good way.
yes, in the secret spirit, the secret sharer of every New Yorker writer. Wrote the most beautiful book about New York, and it all turns on a single tree seen through a single window.
Okay.
And that's what
But the truth is, an essay doesn't need to be anything. An essay can take 1,000 forms. So it has a plasticity to it, an air of exploring, of trying to use the work of writing to understand something. Now, when you talk about subjects, okay, I don't know if you've ever written about a single tree. You have written about the introduction of American-style gyms in Paris, which I think is the single funniest thing I ever read in my life, where they don't have any towels, but they say they are envisaged.
yes.
You have written about bringing up children. You have written about modern art. You have written about Renaissance art. You have written about Abraham Lincoln. You have written about Groucho Marx. You have written about Burt Bacharach. I mean, what in the world have you not written about? So I asked myself, one of the things the essay permits you is to write about lots of different things.
Yes, and that's part of the pleasure of it, obviously, but it's also part of the discipline of it, right?
Well, that's, of course, what interests me. How does something become one of your subjects? How do you say, enough Abraham Lincoln already, let's think about Groucho Marx for a while? Or because they're never pairs. It's just you pivot from one thing.
I genuinely can say, and this sounds as obnoxious as anything you will hear all week from an author, I only write out of things that I feel passionately obsessive about. And I know people say, well, really? But the truth is, Burt Bacharach, for instance, is someone as a
Songwriter.
sometimes songwriter, and there's nobody who fascinates me more in the history of music than Burt Bacharach. He changed the language of American popular music in 7 years, and then, to some degree, never wrote anything as beautiful again, even though he was paired with Hal David, who was not Stephen Sondheim. And I was always fascinated by how the kind of creativity that I met Bacharach once at a workshop of a musical, and I was fascinated by the combination of opacity and talent that he possessed. So just saying that I never write about anything that I'm not obsessed about at some level.
But then we can say that you have to add something else, which is to become Adam Gopnik, you have to have the capacity to be interested in all very different kinds of things.
But
Which I think is an incredible gift, and I think it's part of the gift that you have uniquely given us as a writer, is that you don't do the same thing. We know the formulas of many writers, but we don't know your formula.
Well, it's nice to hear and generous of you to say. I will say only that I come from all families are extraordinary. I come from a peculiar family.
All families are peculiar.
A somewhat marginally psycho family, actually. But one of the things is that we are a family. My parents are college professors. All of my brothers and sisters, of whom I have a countless number, are college professors. And it's a family that is devoted to reading.
Right.
And so my first keen memory in life is reading and sneaking out of my own bedroom at late at night to sit in the light coming up from my parents' bedroom where they, as graduate students, were reading, to read while my sister would come from her bedroom in the pool of light, and we would say, shh, don't let them know we're up and reading, which of course they did. So for me, reading has always had all the pleasures had an illicit pleasure to it, an obsessive pleasure to it, a compulsive pleasure. I read all the time.
Sure.
And it's the only gift I have is being able to read. I transmit eroticism more nimbly through the printed page than through the
we won't go
unmade bed. I don't know how. I'm not sure.
No, it's okay.
So all of those things. So for me, to the degree that those things, if there's a thread, if there's an invisible wire on which I walk, it's the wire of someone who prefers reading to, who was it who said, everyone says it's living, but I think reading's the thing, right?
There we go. And now you have, like our host who introduced us, I have read you. I told you this last night, and you were angry that I was suggesting you were more than 20 years old. But nevertheless, I have read your essays probably at least since the late 1980s. Now I'd have to say, how many years has it been? When a New Yorker comes, the first thing I do is look at the table of contents, and if there's something by you, I read it first, and then I see what else is in there. I mean, this is just the truth. Because you not only are interested in things, you make things interesting. Your engagement with them opens up their interest, and you also make them fun, right?
If thank you, obviously.
It was not a disputable comment.
But if I may say, the other side of that is I am obviously blessed in a professional sense. John Updike said once that his first appearance in the New Yorker was the great event of his professional life.
Right.
He actually first appeared with a tiny little poem about an usherette. And as it was for me when I first landed there in 1986. But it's also true that I feel myself very much a soldier of that army, a citizen of that nation. And I, in the classic sense, sit on the shoulders of those before me. So all of the qualities that you enjoy are the qualities of E.B. White and James Thurber, of Calvin Trillin, of Janet Flanner, and Lillian Ross. And so in that sense, I feel myself, maybe unusually, so I feel myself responsible to a particular past. I feel myself both empowered by and responsible to a procession of writers.
I get it, and it's a very interesting thought, but it's interesting to me. I can maybe feel that sense of tradition, but you never feel you bowing to tradition. You actually bow to tradition by bringing the tradition to life again. It seems to be in your urbanity, your cosmopolitanism, your curiosity, and now you've written a new book. You thought I would never get to it.
No, I'm enjoying this much more. This book has been...
The real work. The real work is called On the Mystery of Mastery. And would you tell us, please, in 2 sentences, what that means?
So,
because I want to ask you 20 more questions. So you have to.
Yeah, has anyone noticed, by the way, that's become the standard prefix of like everyone who goes to a fancy school? You ask them a question and they pause and say, so, meaning if I really work hard, I may be able to explain this at a level I'm sure you
even a dope like you
yes,
could understand.
yes, I'm sure
Please,
Yale
please.
and Duke, those things are that way. The real work is a term that magicians use, and that's where I first heard it. And I couldn't understand it when I first heard it. My 13-year-old son had announced to his mom, who's blessedly here tonight, that he had decided his real goal in life was to be a lounge magician in Las Vegas, and he was planning to go off with his magic teacher to Las Vegas to learn how at 13. And his mom said, "Really?" And I said, "Really." And off we went, because I thought it would be for reasons that I articulate in the book. So I heard magicians using this term, and what they mean by it, Richard, is who has not invented a trick, but who has instant, complete technical mastery over it, but also is able to make it land as an empathetic entertainment, not do it
As if they did it for the first time.
exactly,
instead
as if they did it for the first time. And as soon as I heard that remark, and I realized that was their highest word of praise. Who's got the real work on that? Who's got the real work on Floss's illusion? Who's got the real work on the Erdnase color change? Oh, he's got it. That was the highest praise you could. That was their Légion d'honneur. And I realized that in everything we do in life, we all know who's got the real work, right? We all, one of the things. There are two great questions I've learned in my life as a reporter that you can always get an interesting answer to. And the first one is, who's the Wayne Gretzky, Willie Mays, Serena Williams of your field?
Okay.
You say it to a painter,
Right.
you say it to a plumber,
Right.
and they never give you
That's
a
right.
blank look.
That's right.
You say it to a plumber, you say, "Oh, Joe Perticone. Yeah, that guy is a genius. To give him a
Look at
wrench,
the way he does it, yeah.
he can shut down the water in an entire city in
Right.
2 minutes, right?
Right.
And so that's and what is those qualities? Exactly that
Right.
combination of technical virtuosity
Okay.
and empathetic anticipation. So that's what the mystery, and so that's the mystery of mastery. It's how you would acquire that kind of gift.
So I told two people last weekend that I was going to have the pleasure of interviewing you on your book on mastery. Both of them said the same thing. Oh, Malcolm Gladwell already wrote that book. He already wrote that the Beatles had to play for 10,000 hours in Hamburg before they could become the Beatles, and Bill Gates had to program for 10,000 hours in Seattle before he could become the person who seemed to do this thing effortlessly with no preparation. But of course, that's not what your book is. Your book is not really about the history of that.
And in a quiet way, it refutes that version. Malcolm is known in our family as not that you're not Dad Malcolm, because my kids adore him. And whenever Malcolm comes over to dinner, afterwards, when the kids were younger, they would say, Malcolm is the most interesting conversationalist, not that you're not Dad. Malcolm always finds the one perfect example
That's right.
to make a point.
Sure.
Not that you don't, Dad. And so I feel the burden of Gladwellianism on my shoulders very often. But the truth is that I think that one of the things that this book tries to emphasize is, and I think I say someplace in the book, right, that first of all, the Beatles played for 10,000 hours, but so did Rory Storm and the Hurricanes play for 10,000 hours, and we don't remember Rory Storm.
Exactly, okay.
And the other thing, and the even more significant thing, because that Malcolm, of course, knows, is that Bob Dylan sang for 10,000 hours, and he didn't become a good singer.
That's exactly right.
He became Bob Dylan.
That's right.
He became Bob Dylan.
That's exactly right.
And Bob Dylan is much more interesting than a good singer. In fact, on the road, I went to the Bob Dylan Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, it's the real thing. And there's a letter from Dylan from like 1961 to 1962. And in it he says, people keep criticizing me because I'm not a good singer. I know I'm not a good singer, but I breathe better than anybody else. And that's, of course, why we love Bob Dylan, right?
Mastery.
Yeah, that's mastery.
The other thing that I think many people think your book will be, a book on mastery, is like, okay, you're a famous essayist, you're a famous journalist. Maybe it'll be like mastering the art of French cooking, except mastering the art of the essay. And I told you I looked online to find some other books with the title Mastering the Art. I found one I thought you would enjoy called Mastering the Art of Staff Quality Reporting. And so every art can be mastered, right? But your book is not really about how to become a master.
No.
In fact, the astonishing, okay, now I'll tell you the thing that just blew my mind when I read this book. The book is really it's not about mastery, it's mostly about you. And it's about your effort to come into the proximity of mastery in things you're not that good at or don't know anything about. And I find this astonishing because isn't it really one's whole secret of life is to do the things people think you're good at and not do the things people don't think you're good at? This is why I have no basketball career and many other things we could mention. But the thing is, so in your book, okay, baking. You never learned baking. So in the book, you learned baking.
From my mom.
In the book, like you have a degree in art history, but you never really learned how to do serious old-fashioned drawing.
Life
so you do
drawing,
drawing. You're a New Yorker, so you don't know how to drive. So in the book, you learn how to drive. You don't know how to box. So it's exactly not a book about people, about being a master. It's about somebody who by definition isn't one, trying to see what would it be like to try to learn how to do this.
Well, two reasons for that. One, just because I'm a shameless ham and like, you remember Tigger's breakfast, right, in the Pooh books, right, where Tigger will always try the next thing. And so I'm,
all right,
there's a bit of that.
Okay.
And there's a little tiny piece of George Plimpton, a very tall wasp buried in a tiny Jew.
Right.
And so I enjoy that part of it. But it's also because the truth is that when we do get good at anything, all we can see is the space between our original ambition and our actual accomplishment. Writing is my religion, and I don't use that word cheaply. I write 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, Christmas and Passover and every other day, and it's the one thing that matters, my family aside, that matters most to me. But though I love writing now more than I ever have in my life, I'm always aware of the space between what I want for my writing. When I wake up every morning, it's going to be as essentially rhapsodic as Proust, and it's going to be as piercingly dramatic as Richard Ford, and it's going to be as intricately psychological as George Eliot, and it all ends up sounding like me. And I see that space. But when you take up a new thing like boxing, no matter how alien it is to your nature, you become piercingly aware again of the means by which we learn something and how we go about it. Okay. So you're back in the position of being a 4-year-old learning to read and write.
That's exactly
because you are a 4-year-old learning to read and write. And you learn by painful, counterintuitive instance. Boxing is a good example of it. All of these things you have to do that are totally when you first learn to read and write, I hadn't thought of this ever before. It's so painful, right? Because it is so counterintuitive. All these little symbols stand for physical objects and actions. It's astounding, and you master. I remember learning that the word knife meant a knife, even though it had that damn K in front of it. Right. And similarly, you learn boxing is not unleashed belligerence, right? That's not what you do when you learn to box. You don't learn to unleash your inner Neanderthal. On the contrary, you learn this whole set of defensive postures, and your being good or bad at boxing all has to do with how quickly you can get back into a defensive posture after having thrown a blow. There's a great boxer named Alexis Arguello, who my wonderful teacher, Joey Contrado, worships, and he set me to work watching Alexis Arguello videos from these great Nicaraguan boxers from the 70s, and it's all about how Arguello never, he's like Baryshnikov, never is out of position in that way. And so you learn these things. Now, unless, as I say, you can find another 5'5" intellectual who really wants to fight for a purse, I'm unlikely to ever get in a ring with another one. But boxing has become central to my life now exactly because it enables me to live again the process of mastery.
And
also because...
And I take this back to the genre of the essay, right? Because the point is, you don't write over and over again about things everybody knows you already know about. Yes. You write about things you want to learn about by the writing.
It's the essay, exactly.
And so now in the same thing, you're spending some part of your time doing what you're already known to be good at, and some part of your life learning what it would be like to begin to know how to do something.
Exactly.
Baking.
Yes, baking. Well, I baked with my mother. I should add with boxing, too. The other good thing boxing does is unleash my belligerence. But that's a whole... baking I learned to do with my mom. My mom...
It's incredibly touching.
My mom is an extraordinary person. She was a pioneering genetic linguist. She had 6 kids, PhD in logic and in linguistics, cooked dinner for us every night, a thing I took over from her. And in a book that's filled of difficult, irascible, and intolerable teachers, my mom is by far the most difficult, irascible, and intolerable teacher. Learning to bake bagels with my mother is like, being a Zen adept, right? And being hit over the head with a wooden sword every time you attempt to do it. And so the other thing that I hope that these essays are about in exactly that manner is in everything we do, we are everything we are. And I think that's important. So learning to bake with my mother was not just learning to bake, though I did learn to bake, but it was about my relationship with my mother. My mother and I are very similar. We've had in the past never a difficult, but often a elbows out kind of relationship. And that doesn't describe it well. We've had a thorny relationship. And as a consequence, learning to bake with her was a way of having a conversation with her, recognizing, I might add, that she was aging in ways I could not have had otherwise. And it also turned out to be very much about my wife, because I had underestimated my wife's gifts as a baker for the many decades.
And forgotten some of the important history.
I'd totally forgotten that my wife was actually a wonderful baker whose gifts as a baker had been elbowed out by my mother. And trying to work out all of those equations of family love and domestic engagement through the medium of sourdough was the essay.
The interesting thing about your essays is they're always about something, but they're always about a lot of other things too. So the essay about sourdough is about mother-son relations, about the aging of these relations. So I want to ask you, okay, you'll pardon me, I'm the interviewer, so I get to pick which chapter I want to talk about. Most of us learned how to drive. As Phil Knight might have said, we all learned to drive when we were 16, and then we went on to better things. But you didn't learn to drive.
Until I was 55.
But then 56. When you were 55, okay, I had a grandmother who never learned to drive, and she would have died rather than even sit behind the steering wheel of a car. But you decided, not knowing how to drive, that you would actually, your next exercise in lifelong education would be to learn to drive.
Yeah, I had never learned to drive because we moved to New York when I was 20. Nobody in New York has a car, and we took the subway every place. In the summers, my wife would do the driving when we went out to the ocean, and I would sort of sit in the tradition, as my daughter would say, the traditionally gendered woman's seat, Dad.
Right.
And I would play that part. I'd be the one saying, okay, who needs a cookie? All right, hey, everybody, we got to really keep it down. Mom's trying to find the exit, all right? Just let's really keep it down for the next 5 minutes because Mom's a little stressed.
What a marriage.
Yeah, but I wanted to be in that seat. I really did. And whenever, we would stop at a gas station or something, I would try to look, like a guy whose license had been pulled for speeding, after a lifetime, and was stuck here. What was I going to do? And I wanted to learn to drive finally so I could relieve her and go get the cinnamon buns on a summer morning. And also my son was getting his license then. I felt we needed to do this together. So I think we are the only New York father-son ever to get their license on the same afternoon from the same tester.
You are the only ever, and you will be the only
ever in the... So here's what was fascinating about it. I discovered, first of all, I had another great teacher, wonderful teacher named Arturo Leon, who was an inspired teacher whose whole theme was, Adam, you have to become the noodle. And he would say, Adam, become the noodle. And I'd say, what do you mean, Arturo, become the noodle? And he'd say, you have to learn to be firm and upright, like great spaghetti, but also totally bending, because that's what the tester will see. If you're too tense, no good. If you're too loose, no good. Become the noodle and always be free. So I became the noodle, and I passed the test. And what he meant by it metaphorically was you have to find this sweet spot between when you're driving, between constant motion and confidence. And then he asked me...
And everyone who knows how to drive knows that, but none of us knew that we knew it because we learned it when we were too young.
Yes, and so...
Or because you forget the things, you forget the learning part after you learn things.
And it's transferable, because at one point Arturo said to me very sweetly, he said, Adam, how do you write a book? I'd like to write a book about teaching people to drive called Dream Driving. And I tried to explain to him all the ways you organize and all. Right? I finally said to him, Arturo, to write a book, you have to become the noodle. And that's true.
It's one of the most endearing moments in a book with many endearing moments in it. You talk about driving, you talk about someone teaching you signal, then what's the word? What's the word? Slide.
Slide.
Okay.
Slide over. You say, Adam,
Okay.
slide over.
It's beautiful. But then at a certain point, you having been the pupil and he the master, he then says to you, can I ask you something? How do you write a book?
Yes.
Like, I know how to drive, and I'm willing to teach you, but you know how to do something. Maybe you'd teach me.
Yes, and that's part of the...
It's just this moment of sort of reciprocal or asymmetrical competence or something.
The other thing Arturo taught me is the use of the hand. Because his point, and weirdly, this comes back to Irving Goffman. Irving Goffman has, or some of his students have interesting essays about the difficulty of driving. Basically, why do we have so many accidents? And one reason is because we don't empathize with the driver in the next car because we see the next car as a black box that is operating on its own rather than with a human being. We're sort of autistic in that old-fashioned sense. We're mind-blind about the next car. So Arturo said, always be in contact with everyone around you. He said, use the hand. Use the hand. The hand means bless you. The hand means fuck you. The hand means turning. The hand means, but always have, so when I'm driving now, I always have my hand out using the hand. And Martha is always saying to me, put your hand down. You don't.
My dear newfound friend, when I moved from Connecticut to North Carolina, I learned very quickly you do not use the hand. It has a totally different meaning in different places.
I won't do it here. The other thing, just quickly, that I did learning to drive so late is, driving is not that difficult. It just is insanely dangerous. It is insanely dangerous. And that's why we teach kids at 16. It's not because they're younger and sprier. It's because they have no sense of mortality. And the moment you're out in your 50s, I see a gentleman nodding, right? You realize, oh my God, this is insane that we allow people to do this. I've got 3 tons of steel going at 60 miles per hour, and I have no real control over this. This could go anywhere.
Let alone of the other people.
No.
And then a very beautiful thing that happens, you mentioned this person, Irving Goffman. When I was in college, his work was very popular. He's the person who devised the study of things like personal space.
Exactly.
Like you're at a party and you take a step closer to people and they take a step exactly the same distance back. He worked on studies of like, how do people walk down sidewalks? They won't speak to each other, but they all know how to move without bumping into each other or without making too much space. And you in the middle of driving, all of a sudden you realize that's what this is too.
Yes,
right?
exactly. And that's part of what that's what the hand is all about, right? Part of it is the craft of understanding how you drive as a sort of metaphysical activity as much as just, you don't just turn on the gas. You try and understand the environment of human beings that you're in. And Arturo was fantastic. And I've lost track of him. It makes me sad. If anyone knows of Arturo Leon, the driving instructor, I'd love to be back with him. One of the things I was blessed with throughout this book were wonderful teachers, and some of them were highly qualified teachers, like my drawing teacher, Jacob Collins. Some were just people I discovered, like Arturo. And one of the things I hope the book is about the beauty of the teacher-student relationship in that way.
Absolutely.
And so I believe that teaching in that way is the highest calling, even though I don't do it particularly well myself. And one of the things that's curious about great teachers, you've spent your life teaching and supervising teachers and finding teachers, is that they have to be simultaneously, this only occurred to me after the book was written. There's always wisdom in Greek mythology. And in Greek mythology, who are the greatest teachers? They're the centaurs, right? They're the wild men, not the tame men. And all great teachers, male and female, always have to be the people who are a little bit scary. And you're a little frightened in their presence because they set a bar that's so high and they won't compromise on it.
Well, they have to command your attention enough for you to learn the thing that enables you to go on without them.
Yes,
right?
that's beautiful.
And that's the way that all of these things
are.
Yes,
and so they have to have an incredibly high standard, but they also have to have infinite patience. If you're prepared to make a commitment, they will stay with you.
And it's all about having you go on after you're done with them, right? Well, as parenting is, as teaching is.
I said, there's an essay of mine, not in this book, but in my book, Through the Children's Gate, called Last of the Metrozoids, about the greatest teacher I ever knew. Kirk Varnado, the great art historian to whom this book is dedicated. And in it I have a line, which I won't remember properly, but it was about how, what's the difference in a guru and a great teacher? A guru gives us a structure and then his system. A teacher gives us his example and then ourselves. And I think that's true about great teachers.
Something else I learned in your book, I'm about to ask you a different question entirely, is a lot of learning involves learning how to do a step and a step and a step. So in boxing, right, you do things in
Jab,
certain order,
cross.
right? Jab, cross.
Uppercut.
When you do the waltz, you take a step, you take a step, you close the box, you take a step, you take a step. But that as you internalize these things that at first are like a program, that all of a sudden you can do it. And not only, can I just read you one sentence of your work? Please, I hope you will beam when you see which one I've chosen. Oh, now I better make sure I can find it. Okay. If you surrender to allow this simple pattern to imprint itself on your mind, an inordinate bliss will blossom. And I was thinking, you remember in My Fair Lady, I could have danced all night? Okay, you learn to do this thing, and at first it's a set of steps, and all of a sudden you can do it, but the minute you can do it, all of a sudden a new delight, a new pleasure has entered
My
the
Fair
life.
Lady is so apropos, right? Because that's the greatest moment in musical theater about exactly that moment. It's the rain in Spain, right? Oh, by George, she's got it. Where poor Eliza has been tortured into learning this new dialect, this new phonology, and suddenly it doesn't happen slowly, bit by bit. Suddenly, it's the rain in Spain stays mainly on them, and they're all astounded. But that's the moment. That's exactly the moment.
The real work.
That's the real work.
The real work.
That's the real work. Exactly. That's the most beautiful musical realization of the real work.
This guy writes musicals too.
Yes.
Because what doesn't he do? Would you just tell me, is there a single thing you're not good at that you would not be interested in learning how to do?
Oh, there's so many things I'm not good
Just
at.
give me one example.
Singing. I would love to be able to sing, and I can't sing at all. I can't whistle. I can't even whistle. You know, Stephen Sondheim has that beautiful song, Anyone Can Whistle.
Right.
And I am the guy, I once
that
actually said to Steve Sondheim, you can't whistle, right? That's why you wrote that beautiful song? And he said, no, I whistle fine. He said, and I said, oh, I'm the one. I'm the only one who can't whistle. I wish I were, I don't know, I guess I'd like to be able to go camping. The camping is something I can't do. The thing that
It's actually, it's easier than boxing.
the thing that I write about in the book, and that was the hardest part of the book not to write, to publish, is that I suffer from this thing called perioresis, which is an extreme shy bladder. So I can't use the washroom on airplanes. And that's debilitating. I wish I could, and I'm struggling to do it. And I wrote about it in the book exactly because we all struggle to master things, but sometimes things have mastered us.
Right.
And almost invariably things have mastered us, and we have to disassemble the things that have mastered us.
It's a very interesting chapter, and all the more because it's not like you don't yet know how to do this thing. It's like you know how to not do it in some way, and so which is a whole different kind of
Exactly. That puts it perfectly. You have somehow instructed yourself how not to do it, as people with eating disorders have instructed themselves not to eat, and as people with fear of heights have instructed themselves to be afraid, and we all have to struggle to disassemble it. And it's the one thing my wonderful therapist pointed out to me, cognitive behavioral therapist. He said, when you're feeling down about it, he said, look out, he said in the subway, because we're New Yorkers, but look out in the room, he said, every single person you're looking at is struggling with something. Every single person has got something. You don't know what it is, but they're struggling with something too.
That's right.
And I think that's so.
I want to ask you one last question, just because it's meaningful to me.
Please.
I took a walk. My wife and I took a walk in Charleston this morning. We were down by the Battery. I saw Fort Sumter in the distance. We turned the corner and we ran into you.
Yes.
And your wife, also discovering, so it was a beautiful moment. But actually, one of the things you've written, our host introduced you in terms of the essay on incarceration. We haven't talked about anything like that, but that's within your range. You also wrote the most extraordinary thing on what could be argued to be the two greatest Americans of the 19th century, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. You wrote a piece about them and about the complementary gifts of someone who's an activist perfectionist and someone who is a politician to the degree that is necessary to make any form of activism be realized in any degree at all. Tell us a little. I mean, so this is the city where my point. We're in the city where the Civil War began. So it seemed very close to me to feel that.
That was something I feel.
From Groucho Marx to Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln.
I think of Frederick Douglass as the greatest American who has ever lived. He was matchlessly eloquent, unimaginably brave, and one of the bravest things he ever did was at the crucial moment as the Civil War was inevitably on its way. He had to choose between John Brown and Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
In other words, he had to choose whether to follow the path of revolution, terrorism of a kind,
Right. Exactly.
violence, or choose the path of democratic proceduralism with all of its frustrations. And it was part of his genius, knowing everything there was to know about the horrors of slavery, that he took Lincoln's side. And he felt this is the way that we have to assemble a coalition of everyone who understands the evil of slavery, and then we can overcome it. I have a piece coming out on Monday about Bayard Rustin, who was very much in Douglass's wake, the great organizer of the March on Washington.
Right.
And his relationship with Dr. King was very similar in some ways, because Dr. King was the great visionary, metaphor maker, and poet, and Rustin was the organizer. Rustin was the man who got the buses to Washington and who insisted that the sandwiches all be peanut butter and jelly and not cheese, because cheese could go bad in the heat. He had that kind of mind for essential detail. And without that kind of mind, Dr. King's vision was impossible. Lincoln was the Rustin of Douglass. In other words, Lincoln was the one who explained to Douglass, said, I have to run this war, and I have to run this war with people who have whole hearts, and I have to run it with people who have half hearts, and I have to run it with people who have no hearts at all. But that's the job of a politician. It's the job of a passionate, poetic prophet. It's the job of the prophet, like Douglass or Dr. King, to say, here's the vision, here's the summit we have to climb, the horizon we have to transcend, and it's the job of the politician, and it's just as noble a calling as being the prophet, to say, and here's how we make the prophetic possible. And I think that's what I was trying to write about.
If you missed this essay, it appears substantially in your book before this one, called A Thousand Small Sanities, as the last chapter of it. It's just an extraordinary piece of civic reasoning that I think anybody who lives in a democratic society would profit from reading.
Thank you.
So I got to ask all the questions. Is there anybody in the room who would like to venture? Oh, aren't I supposed to say a couple things? Aren't I supposed to say, please put your question in the form of a question, or what I mean is, please don't give us an answer. Please ask him a question. 2, what's the second thing you're supposed to do? Wait for the mic. You may think you can bellow, but this is a big space. And 3, have at it. Where's the hand?
Can I just say quickly before? No, I'll say it at the end. That's all right. Go ahead. Someone?
I've had so much fun, I promise you, even though you may not think you're good at this, you could become a master.
Exactly.
What do you think the future is of the essay with changing business models today?
Well, that's a good question. What's the future of the essay?
Great question.
The essay is in some ways it's a delicate thing. There aren't, it's not like being an IT person or writing code. There aren't a million people who make a living at it. On the other hand, it's the natural human form we want to explore. Substack, right, which has become such a thing in the last 2 years, taking over from tweets and bloggers. Substacks are essays. They're daily or weekly essays by anybody who wants to put something out there.
Right.
Some of them are polemical, but the best ones tend to be exactly essay-like, in as much as they say, there are all these takes on some subject. Let me try and make sense out of all these different takes. That's an essay. It's not the take, it's the effort to make some larger sense out of the takes. So I'm hopeful in that way.
Here's one over here. Aren't you the person who's supposed to know that you're supposed to wait for the microphone? As my granddaughter would say, what the?
I'm sorry, breaking my own rules. Are you concerned about the rapid development of artificial intelligence?
I think at this point in American history, we should be more concerned with honest-to-God stupidity than with artificial intelligence. But since you asked, I did a piece for the New Yorker about my adventures with DALL-E, the visual AI thing, which you can find online, and it was huge fun. And what I generally think about it is so far, and everybody says, oh, well, that'll be different in 5 years, but I'm a little skeptical. artificial intelligence is great at pastiche, which is enormous fun in the visual arts because you make all these strange surrealist collisions. And it can pastiche. I once asked it to write me a point of view, this broadcast I do for Radio 4 in Britain. And it can pastiche things well, but it's not capable of coming up with an original take, with an original idea. And maybe it can, maybe it will, but I haven't seen it yet. But as I say, I've lived through already, and this is why people say now that I've been reading you since I learned how to read. But I have lived long enough, as have you, to know the shape of a technological scare. No one will remember this anymore, but when we were growing up, television was the soul killer and consciousness fragmenter of American life, right? Television was going to destroy everything.
Vast wasteland.
Exactly. In exactly the same terms, it had sucked out politics, it sucked out everything. And now television is the benign hearth that we all gather around to watch long-form European series. Right. And I have actually
not all of them by Bernard
heard a parent say, and I was that parent, darling, please get off your goddamn computer and come watch television with the rest of the family.
That's great. Great line. There we go.
So I'm always inclined to think that if all the previous technological scares were a little empty, that maybe the next one will be too.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yes.
Here's one.
Gentleman here.
Yeah, so you wrote a book about mastery in which you take on new objects and work toward mastery, but at the end you mentioned being mastered by something. How do you apply what you've written and learned to sort of outmaneuvering something that already has you?
I'm not entirely sure I know what you mean, but if you mean by...
Like the shy bladder.
Oh, yes. Oh, right.
Or just something that already sort of maybe...
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. Yeah, exactly. The point is that the things that have mastered us without our knowledge, we have to disassemble piece by painful piece in exactly the same way we assemble a mastery. If anyone has been in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, you go up the exposure hierarchy. If you're frightened of heights, you don't go to the 50th floor. You go to the second floor and see if you can tolerate looking out the window. And the following week, you go to the third floor. It's the same incremental process, actually, by which democratic politics proceeds. But there's another sense of it, too, that I talk about in the book that's maybe even what you have in mind is a little deeper. And that is we find that what really enthralls us, what captivates us, what obsesses and owns us in the pursuit of mastery is other people, right? And that we can't do any of these things in the absence of another person. That's literally true. You can't learn to box unless you're constantly imagining another boxer. You only box in the context of somebody else. You duck, you throw, you spar, and someone else. The book ends with my learning how to dance with my daughter, my wonderful daughter, Olivia. And that was all about the way you learn to dance is to look in someone's eyes while you move your feet. Dancing is about the other person. It's not ultimately about you. It's about the other. And I think that's true about every kind of mastery. Drawing is about the beholder. It's not about your hand. We can't have any coherent idea of mastery that doesn't engage at least an audience of one. And that's the other sense in which the mastery owns you.
Is there maybe one last? Here's one. This zone over here is very rich in questions.
I think it's such an interesting moment because of AI. And you said that Eliza Doolittle had the rain is Spain, which I would call the aha moment.
Right.
And if we ask AI and it tells us the answer, we never have the aha moment.
Yes.
So it's that loss of the aha moment. How do we deal with that?
Well, I don't think, and maybe this is a good place to end, I don't think, and I'm a New York Jets fan, so I'm used to being wrong about everything. I'm used to losing, to sound like someone else. I think that one of the things is the aha moment will never go away. This book is about the proliferation of epiphany and their availability. They change over time. And all the people I know who teach will tell you that, right? They'll say, expertise is no longer very valuable. There's no point in teaching your kids the difference between a eulogy and an elegy because they'll be checking in on their phones in the back of the class. You don't bring that. Teaching them what makes a beautiful eulogy or a deeply moving elegy and so on. That's work that teachers can still do. There will be, the camera exists already to be a life-drawing artificial intelligence, has for 200 years. That doesn't mean that the dialogue between the human hand with some smearing edge on a blank surface doesn't continue to move us exactly because it represents the traces of a human existence, like Bob Dylan's breathing.
It was a great last question, and it was a great last answer. And I'm going to close. Richard Ford gave us a line from Emerson, and I'll quote you one. The one thing of value is the active soul, the human mind in all its capacities working its powers. And I feel you are a person with a particularly active soul, full of curiosity, full of engagement, full of the wish to explore life and understand things more fully, and you have helped us all, through your activity, become more active ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam Gopnik.
I just want to add, we have been having such a sensational time here in Charleston. I cannot thank this city enough for its beauty and its hospitality. It is a wonderful place to come and speak. Thank you.